Every morning, millions of people travel into Britain's most productive cities. Yet many of the workers those cities depend on can no longer afford to live there. One of the world's richest economies is struggling to build homes, raise productivity, and restore the pace of growth that once defined it. How did Britain arrive here? Britain helped invent the Industrial Revolution. It pioneered modern banking, modern manufacturing, and modern infrastructure. This is the Anglosphere report. Start with productivity, the single number economists watch most closely, and the one Britain has struggled with longest. Productivity means output per hour worked. It is, in the simplest possible terms, how much value an economy generates for every hour its people spend working. For most of the 20th century, British productivity grew by roughly 2% a year, a rate that, compounded over decades, is what actually raises living standards. Since the 2008 financial crisis, that growth has slowed dramatically. By 2023, on GDP per hour worked, Britain ranked fourth out of the G7, behind the United States, Germany, and France. In the first quarter of 2026, ONS flash estimates show productivity was just 0.4% higher than a year earlier. Multi-factor productivity, a broader measure capturing capital investment alongside labor, actually fell in 2024 by 0.6%. Economists call this Britain's productivity puzzle. This documentary argues it is not entirely a puzzle. Part of the explanation has been sitting in plain sight. Now the housing crisis. According to the Center for Policy Studies, Britain has 446 homes per 1,000 people. The second worst rate among comparable European countries against a weighted European average of 542. The national shortfall, approximately 6.5 million homes, with England alone accounting for 5.85 million of that gap. 6.5 million homes. At current delivery rates, Britain will not reach the European average until the year 2115. London's own numbers are more severe still. Just 4,170 homes were started in the capital in the 2024 to 25 year, a 72% fall on the previous year, and less than 5% of the 88,000 home annual target. England last built more than 300,000 homes in a single year in 1969. For many young professionals, the question is no longer when they'll buy a home, but whether they ever will. Why does Britain build so slowly? Part of the answer lies in a policy now 70 years old, the Green Belt. Introduced around English cities from the mid-1950s, Green Belt policy was designed to prevent urban sprawl. It has done that. It has also, according to a growing body of economic research, constrained housing supply in exactly the places where housing demand is highest. An analysis by the London School of Economics and the Dutch Bureau for Economic Policy Analysis found that house prices in England would be 35% cheaper without current regulatory land use constraints. A separate study, published in the Economic Journal, found Greenbelt policy generates genuine amenity value, but also substantially reduces housing supply, decreasing affordability even as it improves certain quality of life measures for existing residents. This is a real trade-off, not a simple policy failure. Greenbelt land provides genuine benefits. Those benefits come with a measurable cost, borne disproportionately by people who don't yet own a home. The government's 2024 planning revision introduced Greybelt, lower quality, previously developed land, intended to allow targeted release without abandoning the broader policy. Whether that translates into faster delivery remains, as of this documentary's production, unproven. Economists often discuss Britain's productivity crisis and housing crisis separately. This documentary argues they are two chapters of the same story. When housing is expensive and scarce in the places with the most productive jobs, workers cannot easily move to where their labor is most valuable. Economists call this reduced labor mobility, and it has a direct, measurable productivity cost. When housing absorbs an increasing share of household income, less income remains for the spending and investment that support a dynamic, innovative economy. When businesses cannot house their workforce affordably, That constrains where those businesses can locate and constrains regional economic growth outside London specifically. This is not a novel claim in economic literature. It is the specific British severity of it, one of Europe's most restrictive land use planning regimes, combined with one of its most productivity-challenged major economies, that makes Britain's case distinctive. The regional picture confirms it. London and the Southeast remain the most productive regions of the UK economy. They are also the regions with the most severe housing supply constraints and consequently the highest prices. The North, the Midlands, and other regions face the opposite problem. Housing that is often more affordable, but concentrated in areas with historically lower productivity and fewer high-value jobs. The result is a geographic mismatch. The places with the most economic opportunity have the least affordable housing. The places with the most affordable housing often have the least economic opportunity. Multiple UK governments, under different parties, have described addressing this imbalance as a central goal. The persistence of that imbalance across successive governments is itself informative. This is a structural problem, not one government's policy failure. How does Britain compare to its Anglosphere peers? Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom have all seen their house price-to-income ratios rise by more than 80% since 1994, a genuinely shared Anglosphere pattern. New Zealand's ratio rose even further, 126% between 1994 and 2021, before falling back significantly by 2024, following Auckland's 2016 zoning reform. A study published in the Journal of Urban Economics found that reform doubled construction permits within 5 years and left rents in upzoned areas 26 to 33% lower than they would otherwise have been. The United States saw only a 20% rise over the same 3 decades, real but far smaller. Japan's ratio actually fell 25% between 1994 and 2024. The product of a planning system that has historically permitted significantly more by-right residential construction. Singapore represents yet another model, a state that directly builds and allocates the majority of its housing stock, achieving high ownership through direct government provision rather than private market supply alone. No single one of these systems is straightforwardly transferable to Britain, but the comparison establishes something important. Britain's outcome is not inevitable. The skeptic's challenge. First, is housing expensive simply because Britain is a successful, desirable economy? Japan's economy remains highly developed, and its housing became more affordable over the same period. Suggesting success alone does not determine the outcome. Second, is migration the primary cause? The LSE and CPB research attributes the majority of England's excess housing costs specifically to regulatory constraints on supply, not demand-side population growth alone. Third, would planning reform alone solve the problem? Almost certainly not. The construction sector's 150,000 worker skills, shortage and slow local authority capacity, constrain delivery independently of planning rules themselves. Fourth, do developers deliberately restrict supply to protect prices? Critics allege land banking. Industry bodies dispute this, citing genuine financing constraints. This documentary found no independent study conclusively resolving this dispute. It remains genuinely contested. Can Britain recover? Every credible answer involves multiple, simultaneous reforms, not a single lever. Planning reform, including the Grey Belt framework, is underway, though its delivery impact remains unproven. Construction sector investment, addressing the skills shortage directly, would need sustained funding measured in years. Infrastructure investment connecting affordable regions to higher productivity job markets could reduce the geographic mismatch, though such projects typically take a decade or more. Regional economic development, sustained across multiple governments regardless of party, would be required to genuinely narrow the productivity gap that leveling up rhetoric has, to date, not measurably closed. There is no simple answer, because there was no simple cause. Every generation inherits a different Britain. One inherited the infrastructure of the Industrial Revolution. One inherited the post-war housing expansion that built modern British suburbs. Today's generation has inherited a housing shortage measured in millions of homes, and a productivity slowdown now approaching 2 decades. Two crises that are not separate at all, but two symptoms of the same underlying constraint on how easily people, capital, and opportunity can move to where they're most needed. Britain is not alone. Australia, Canada, New Zealand. Each faces its own version of the same question. When housing becomes harder to build, what happens to opportunity itself? That may be one of the defining economic questions of the Anglosphere in the 21st century. I am the Anglosphere Report, connecting the stories shaping the Anglosphere in the world.